Andy O'Brien, Director of Player Performance and Health for Cortex. He's also Management and Chief Performing Officer at Cizzle Brands and Cizzle Brands, and Joy will talk about that as well. And meanwhile, he's also the personal trainer for the likes of Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, and others. And Andy O'Brien joining Gord Stellick and Mike Johnson this morning. How are you, Andy?
I'm good, thanks. How are you guys?
We're great. And obviously we want to talk about, some of the guys, the Four Nations face-off. Obviously you got a vested interest and excitement about that. But first of all, we've heard about Sidney training with you and Nathan McKinnon training with you, and now others like Jack Eichel and that train with you. How did it all start?
Well, I've been doing this for a long time. I think just growing up, I was sort of a multi-sport athlete, playing a lot of different sports and learning how to do different things training-wise myself, and eventually got an education and started training people. And being from the Maritimes, I had an opportunity to meet Sid at a pretty young age, and not a bad client to build a business around.
You mentioned, Andy, we so many ways to go with this, and it's fascinating to talk to you. It's awesome to do. You mentioned multi-sport athlete, though, and I think for people listening who have kids growing up playing, there's a real tendency. I have kids that have just gone through high school, and the coaches, everyone wants the kids to focus on one sport from the time they're like 13 years old going forward. Do you have any thoughts on the value in playing multiple sports, or should kids try to get sort of focus on their one individual favorite sport earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a lot of value in playing multiple sports, and there's actually some pretty good research around that, Mike. So in Canada, some of the institutions around sport have focused on this concept called the long-term athletic development model, which exposes athletes to different sports. And what's not only important at that age is not only learning the sport, but training your nervous system to be adaptable and to be able to take on new skills. And obviously, as we know with hockey, you're constantly changing what you do throughout your career, whether you're moving from one side of the ice to the other, or center to the wing, or what have you, or adapting a new system that you have to play more defensively, more offensively. Hockey's kind of like a decathlon. And so that ability to actually modify your game and change what you are as a player is so important, and playing other sports can do that for you.
So your guys, like, is Sidney Crosby a great soccer player? Is Nathan McKinnon a great baseball player? I mean, what kind of other sports are they
good at golf?
Well, I would think golf's an automatic, right, Andy?
Yeah, it is. Most of those guys are really good. Like I can say with Sid and Nate, Sid was a quarterback in football growing up.
Really?
Not surprising. Both those guys are good at basketball. Sid loves tennis player, very competitive. So those guys are just, they're smart athletes, and they can adapt to pretty much anything. It's actually funny, in some of the camps that we did, we create off-ice competitions, and we've always done basketball. And it's actually pretty funny. Some of them are great basketball players, and then others are literally the worst basketball players you've ever seen. So that's one of the most entertaining things when we actually start doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, basketball could be a very polarizing sport for hockey players. Some guys take to it and some guys don't. Andy, now you mentioned building your company and your business around Sid and helping, him being an early client of yours. Have you found over the years, maybe Sid notwithstanding, because I think we all can appreciate he's wired a little differently, even than me, who played in the NHL. Like, he's just wired, and maybe Nate's wired the same way. Have you found personality-wise some commonalities amongst your elite athletes about whether it's competitiveness, whether it's energy levels? Like, that's something that maybe they're all different, but some things that make them the same when it comes to training.
Yeah, probably the thing that stands out is the sheer competitiveness. So I think no matter where they are, what they're doing, they're constantly creating something into a competition. So a workout is never a workout. It's always gauging where they are relative to that previous workout, or where they are relative to somebody else. And that can be exhausting for some people. They just can't stay in that sheer competitive, high pressure environment. And these athletes can, in fact, they crave it. And so when you're in that over and over and over again, it's kind of like sharpening that saw, and just that sheer competitiveness comes out. And then in the higher the stakes of a competition, the more pressure there is, the better they become. And they just, continue to move past other players in that way.
So we certainly know there's a few situations like this up in Toronto off season. Gary Roberts, his first client was Steven Stamkos. Now he has the likes of Connor McDavid and others, and they have a full blown camp for I don't know how many weeks, but so many are in that area. We know Chris Cheldios, that California beach camp as well. And geographically, so you on the East Coast, how does it work in the summer? Do they come at different times, or is there kind of a dedicated period that you get NHLers and other elite, almost NHLers for a particular camp?
Yeah, so essentially the camps that we do are typically about a week long right before the season when everybody comes together and we skate and compete, and we have 2 teams and it's highly structured. But then during the summer, essentially I'm pretty much with Sid and Nate full time. So I've kind of always been with them to oversee their daily workouts. And then the rest of the players are flying in and out to see me periodically. Then we're just doing custom program design. So because I was with Sid and pretty much his day-to-day trainer throughout his career, I didn't have the ability to be in a lot of different places. So I kind of got into this model where players that were looking for something a little bit more customized around their needs, would seek me out, and that kind of became my niche, is building programs that are modified for the individual.
So now, Andy, were you the one who finally gave the sign off for Sid to play tomorrow? Was it you we were all waiting on?
No, I wish I was that important, but no, I think, in these types of processes, whether it's Sid or anybody else, it is kind of unique because obviously you're playing with an NHL team, you have your team docs, you have, representation with your agency that's helping you get second and third opinions, but then now you become part of Team Canada, which has its own staff and personnel, all of whom are very familiar to Sid, and Sid has a relationship with and trust. So I think it's a pretty collaborative type of decision. And I think in Sid's case, he's been through this before. He's been around. So he's kind of like a seasoned veteran and, trying to figure out what he can and can't play with. He's been through it all. And so he's definitely capable of making a good decision here.
Okay, so by the way, talking to Andy O'Brien, we mentioned a trainer for the likes of Sidney Crosby, Nathan MacKinnon, and others, NHLers. So the perception is, because they do the commercials and all that they're Sid and Nathan MacKinnon, even though there's an age difference, are Butch and Sundance, Batman and Robin, whatever it may be. So geographically, they're from the same area, but how did the actual friendship, kind of start and flourish?
Yeah, it's actually funny you say that, because they're great friends, very different, very competitive with one another. And when it started, actually, it was kind of through the workouts. Like Nate had started training with me, hadn't met Sid yet. And there was a point in time, obviously, Sid was Nate's hero growing up. And so they had an opportunity to meet. And one of the first times they met, it was actually a workout together, the first time they ever trained together. And it got so competitive. I think we were on the beach training, and that workout culminated in Sid grabbing Nate's ankle and like pulling him down a hill and trying to basically embarrass him workout. And so it started off pretty competitive early, and it's funny that it's turned into such a great friendship.
And you talked about, so you have Sid and Nate, and you're there kind of hands-on every day, but the camp you guys have at the end of the summer, I think that's been out in Vail at times, and it's really like the who's who of the NHL. Like a lot of star players end up going there. How do you curate that roster? Because I'm sure lots of guys now, probably more than the 20 you want to skate with, or 25, however many guys go, want to participate in that kind of environment. How does that camp, that's not maybe training out east, but maybe somewhere in North America where different players come around, how does that work?
Yeah, so it kind of started, actually, my first NHL job way back in 2005. I was working with the Florida Panthers. I was a strength and conditioning coach there. And I think it was in my second year there, we had some veteran players, Ed Belfour and Marty Jelena, who wanted to kind of get away a week before training camp. As you know, kind of that week leading up to training camp gets busy around the arena because you have the NHL players, AHL roster players, staff is running around. Stress, so they just wanted to go somewhere. And Eddie had been to Vail previously with the Dallas Stars. I think their owner had a place out there, and they had gone out there. And there's actually a rink there that has no minor hockey, so it's really, really quiet that time of year. Beautiful hotels, food, great training facilities. It's kind of the perfect place. So we started going, and we've been out there, I think, 13 times now. During COVID, we changed the venue, and we're doing some things a little bit more locally for a few years. And then last season went back out there. And so it started off with kind of a ragtag of nine players, just a few clients of mine at the time. Actually, I had one female, Haley Wickenheiser, was part of that initial roster. And then year after year, as my career started to grow and I had, more clients, we started to build it up. And then eventually Sid came And, when Sid came, then everybody wanted to be there. And so I was working with Matt Duchene and John Tavares and some younger players. And players would just invite their friends and teammates. And typically what made it so great was that everybody competed against each other so hard because they knew each other. And when you go to a camp, you're on the ice with somebody that you don't necessarily know personally, it's hard to compete at 100%. But when it's your friends and you're used to training together, you can kind of get the best out of that competitive environment. And so it's just a lot of fun, and it was a cool place to isolate yourself. And eventually we just had more and more players hearing about it, wanting to come. I think one year Patrick Kane was on the waiting list to get into the camp. It kind of got to that point where it had this stature. We always kept it very private. It was quiet. It was sort of just about the guys. And I think that's why it felt so good. It felt so different, when you have fans around and different types of people. It's just a way of people that just love hockey going and doing what they love and enjoying each other. And so that's kind of how we built it up. And I usually kind of invite my clients first. And then when we have spots on the roster, we throw it out to the veteran guys to see who they want to invite.
Okay, so one more for me, and I'll give Mike the last question after that. But I don't know if people carry business cards anymore. Yours would be a big one, Andy. I mean, mentioned a consultant still with the Florida Panthers. Mentioned being the trainer for so many elite NHL players. So director of player health and performance with Cortex Management and chief performance officer at Cizzle Brands. So people can look it up. It's pretty interesting. You're really diversified. Talk about those two ventures, those two entities.
Yeah, in addition to my training business, I've taken on a few different types of roles. Now I think just leadership roles to help organizations structure what they're trying to do as it relates to training and player development. And so my role, pretty much, I'd worked with the Panthers, I worked with the Pittsburgh Penguins, through 2015 to 2020. And then took a little bit of time off in COVID and got back involved with the Panthers to help them really structure how they build out their training staff for the organization. So less there in the day-to-day and more just helping the management figure out the types of roles that they need. How do they evaluate those roles? How do they support them? And, kind of bring some novel concepts to the team, and have been really doing that the same with Cortex Management, which has to support its players, both at a prospect level, to figure out how do the agents really provide the right advice to players in terms of developing and the types of professionals they work with. And then in addition to that, some of the second opinion process, how do they build a network and how do they create some kind of system around that to be able to make players better. And sports nutrition has always been a passion of mine. So I've always been really interested in the supplement side of things, and, have had the opportunity now to work with Cizzle in terms of product innovation, bringing new things to market where we think that there's gaps. So my job is to ultimately kind of talk to different colleagues and athletes and work with, professionals at teams, whether it's on the strength and conditioning side, the nutrition side, to figure out what types of products they're looking for, where is there a need, and then we work on formulation to create those products. And it's been a blast because the goal of Cizzle is really to take the best products that are suitable for athletes and then make those available to everyone. So that's kind of our standard. If it's good enough for somebody in the NHL, then it's good enough for somebody at home.
Andy, I could talk to you for about 3 hours. I find this so fascinating. And you're, when I was playing, there weren't many people like you out there sort of available. They're just sort of starting as I was maybe tailing off at the end of my career. But maybe just take me, let's say I'm a new client. Let's say I'm a 20-year-old NHL guy. How do you start? I guess there's the general fitness side of things. Like you do your testing, you find out what I'm good at, what I'm bad at, what I can improve at. But as far as tailoring your programs and your attention to a player, and like, what do I do? How do I play? What am I good at? How do you sort of blend the sports science, but also with the sport, because it has to somehow be individualized to what I think I can do as an athlete?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So when I first came into the league in 2005, you're right, it was new. There were a lot of players on that roster that didn't really want to see a strength coach walking in the room trying to tell them what to do, right? So it was definitely a changing of at that time. And essentially what was fascinating to me, I remember that first training camp, we had about 60 players. We did a whole bunch of off-ice testing, looking at pretty much everything you could imagine. Everything from VO2 max to different types of lactate thresholds to bike tests to off-ice tests, sprinting, lifting weights. And it was amazing to me that actually some of the best players on the team scored very poorly, and then you had some athletes who were doing really well off ice but weren't great players. And it's really common to see this. And I think the excuse that some people give that is that some players are just skilled and that's why they're good hockey players, but they don't really have physical capabilities. And I looked at it actually differently. To me, if somebody's a good player, there's a lot of movement happening on the ice, and they do have physical qualities that are actually contributing to them being a great player. And so I became curious, and I knew that I needed to change some of the things that I was looking at off the ice to really understand why these players are the best players and why some of these other athletes that are actually impressive in the gym aren't, and what are some of those qualities. And when you actually start breaking down things like anticipation and timing and movement skills and acceleration and the ability to maintain speed through different types of movement patterns, these are all physical qualities that you actually see in really good players. And I think things have evolved now to the point where every player trains and trains hard and is highly committed, and you just don't see players that are able to make it just because they're highly skilled. There's a huge off-ice component. The game's become so fast, so competitive, and with that speed to be able to sustain that through 82 games and then 2 months into the playoffs, you just have to have exceptional fitness quality. So I think it's really come full circle with respect to the science and how detailed it is. But to answer your question, for me, I think it just was a level of curiosity of trying to match the different off-ice variables with the game, and with that you create a conversation with each player. So when that 20-year-old comes in, you can identify where the gaps are in their game. Maybe they have great top speed, but they're not very good at that stopping and starting and slowing the game down and holding on to pucks. And so we can see very specific qualities that are associated with that we can work.
So, hey, Andy, like Mike said, we could talk forever. Real pleasure chatting with you. And your one prediction, the winner of the Four Nations face-off is going to be what?
Really quick. I think I'm going to have to go with Canada on this one.
There we go. Well, like we said, I know your clients will be very much involved with whatever country, whatever team. Andy, congratulations on all your success, and thanks very much for joining us this morning. Very enlightening, very enjoyable, and hopefully we can talk down the road.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was a pleasure.